What's the crack, everyone? It's Nathan here, aka the Rambling Kern and head instructor of Kern School of Combat. So today's video is one that I've kind of covered in the past, but I just wanted to go into a bit more detail and kind of give the famous answer, a bit of context to this topic, because it's one that comes up a lot, and it's one that comes up a lot in Ireland, probably more so in Ireland really than I ever encounter outside of Ireland. And that is, did the Irish practice martial arts? And I've covered videos on this in the past, and this is a question I get asked a lot, especially around Irish stick fighting, predominantly around Irish stick fighting. And I find this quite interesting, and this is kind of something I wanted to do a bit of a deep dive on today. Now, if you're interested in my work, you'll find a Patreon down below. You can sponsor my work, and if you're interested in classes, you'll find links down below for that. So now that's out of the way. I wanted to touch on this topic because I've had a lot of people ask this, especially in January. You know, people are looking for new things to do, and often the question comes up of, well, I heard you do Irish stick fighting. Is that something that the Irish actually did? Like, did they actually practice a martial art? Surely it wasn't just lads in a field getting drunk, swinging sticks at each other. And I think the big issue for what people mean by martial art is that they have a very preconceived idea around what a martial art is. So even some of the definitions you'll see of the term martial art, you'll see it refers to a form of exercise or combat used for self-defense or warfare originating in Asia. And that isn't really correct. Like, martial arts is quite an umbrella term that covers a lot of stuff. The art of Mars being the art of war, coming from the Roman term. And I think the issue is that a lot of people think of traditional martial arts when they think of what a martial art looks like. So, like I said earlier, they think of something like, let's say, karate. It's probably the most widely known martial art from media. And they picture people in uniforms lined up with belts and gradings and curriculum and a person standing at the top of the room giving orders, and everyone bows, and we have this etiquette that we follow. And the thing is, that's not really how martial arts were practiced or done in Europe, full stop. I think the big issue around that is that people think of a martial art and they think that's how martial arts practiced, that's how it should look. So clearly, if it doesn't really look like that, it's probably not a martial art. And that really couldn't be further from the truth, because if we think about all of the other things that were going on at the height of faction fighting and the height of Irish stick fighting in Ireland, a lot of those people were practicing a multitude of martial arts. And it's strange that I don't really get questioned on that near as much as I do around stick fighting. And what do I mean by that? Well, you have a lot of Irish people at the time boxing, wrestling, fencing, all sorts of other different things. And those are martial arts, especially at the time. Like, fencing was still used in the military. It was a battlefield art for people who were actually going to war, as was boxing and wrestling for many, many people too. So I think the issue, well, one of the issues comes from that people have this preconceived idea of that's what a martial art is, that's what martial art looks like, but that's not really a martial art. And anyone who's done other arts, say kind of folk wrestling styles, or even something that's quite popular, for example, like Muay Thai, that is an art that doesn't have belts and ranks and doesn't have like a master standing at the front of the room. You go to a gym and you train very similar to how you would with boxing. Boxing is the same thing. You have a coach, but you don't have like a black belt. You might have a title or something, and that kind of might make you a coach. But I know coaches who've not really fought. They've just gone into coaching, or they've fought at an amateur level and we're good. But anyway, that's a tangent of its own. So kind of what I'm getting at is that a lot of people have this notion that if a martial art doesn't fit into that bracket, that it's probably not a martial art. But if we list all of the things that you would think about with a martial art, Irish stick fighting does fall into that. So if we think about, did people meet up to train together in groups and work to improve on it? Yes. And we know they did. I mean, I have first-hand accounts of that on my channel. You can go and listen to those. Did they practice in groups? Yes. Did they have techniques and things that they worked on? Yes. Did they have teachers and people who were, teaching them techniques and helping them refine them? Yes. We have multiple references to that. Was there particular styles that they were learning? Yes, we do know that's a thing. We have multiple different ones. A few now that are kind of lost to history that we have references to, but we have no idea what they look like. And, kind of so on and so forth. Like, Irish stick fighting does have all of those things, and it had all of those things. And I think the issue is people are used to seeing certain arts that don't have that sort of curriculum, but are not really quite used to seeing it, especially in the West, with mainly our exposure being Asian weapon arts, where they're not used to seeing something that doesn't have like a belt and rank system. Whereas if you look at most Indigenous weapon or wrestling styles, I think they're the two best to look at. You'll often see that they don't have a traditional ranking kind of martial arts style system that we're used to. And even with that, the belt system that we know in the West is a very new thing. It was introduced in the early 1900s, I believe, mainly through judo to get more people involved and interested in judo and willing to stay, all the way through to black belt. And you'll see that in a lot of more modern arts, where they have more and more belts to try to help retain people because, people like a shiny new fashion accessory. The thing is, if you look at Indigenous arts, and this is where I find it gets quite interesting, because people don't bat an eyelid, like I said, at wrestling, because they're used to seeing that. There's still Indigenous wrestling arts practiced all over the world in the most far remote areas, because ultimately for wrestling you don't need anything. You just need another person, and you can wrestle and you can practice and train. So when people look at something like collar and elbow, they don't bat an eyelid. And we have plenty of artwork of people doing it. The same thing that we have with Irish stick fighting. We have plenty of references to people doing it and having matches and bouts, as we do with Irish stick fighting. And no one bats an eyelid at collar and elbow. We have newspaper reports and clippings and all that sort of stuff with collar and elbow. Same thing in Irish stick fighting. No one questions collar and elbow, but they do with Irish stick fighting, and I find that kind of fascinating. But if we look at Indigenous stick arts, probably the big one I always have with Irish stick fighting is, well, why don't we have manuals? Why don't we have training books? And I will keep repeating this, is most of the people training this were not literate. They didn't have access to, the ability to write things down. But also, even if they did, they weren't really meant to be fighting. So the last thing you want to do is a written record of the thing you weren't meant to be doing. If you're a criminal, I'm not saying these people were criminals, but they were conducting an act that was negatively viewed upon by the law. You don't want to leave a paper trail of the thing you were doing. So, like I said, if we look at Indigenous arts, say if we go as far afield as Asia, you have many different arts in the Philippines where these people didn't write these things down, but they had a curriculum, they passed these things down, and they had weapon arts, not just stick. You have knife, sword, and everything in between. But if you come closer to home, you have the exact same thing here. We have a very famous example of Jogo de Pau, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, which is an Indigenous stick art to Portugal, which has very, very many similarities to Irish stick fighting. Now, many of those people were using a staff-sized stick. Now, if I'm getting this wrong, please do let me know in the comments. But as far as I know, it kind of originates from people who were walking around the countryside, as well as farmers and shepherds who were using staffs in daily work, and as a result, were learning to use these things. And we don't have any manuals or written records of this up until, or manuals as such, up until the late 1800s, because that was when people outside of the main core group who were practicing it started to gain interest in it and wanted to write it down and categorize it and catalog these movements. Yet the art goes way, way back further than that. And there's many, many examples of this all across Europe. And like I said, wrestling is a prime example. We have dozens of arts that I can think of. You have arts in Ireland, you have collar and elbow, you have arts in Scotland, in England, in Switzerland, all over. All of these folk wrestling styles, and again, no one bats an eyelid about the techniques or doubts their veracity as an art. Yet it happens a lot with Irish stick fighting. And I think a big thing that also happens is a lot of people think, well, I haven't heard of it and I'm a lifelong martial artist and something I haven't heard of, or I'm Irish. This is a big one I encounter a lot. I'm Irish, that's not something I've heard of. Surely that wasn't a thing. And yet we have so many records of it, and yet people doubt it. Now, some of you might have recently seen a gentleman by the name of David Cowan. He is working on reviving the art of stone lifting in Ireland, and I caught wind of him many years ago when I was in the National Archives, because he was in there looking for records of stone lifting. And I was doing the exact same thing at the time, looking for records of Irish stick fighting. And that's kind of how I heard of what he was doing. Now, no one would bat an eyelid about stone lifting because there's loads of records, all the same stuff, and he's done incredible work going out and finding these stones and doing these things. So, we have the records of this stuff. We know this stuff was done, and yet a lot of people are very hesitant to accept that it's a thing, because I think there's this strange disconnect in Ireland of well, I haven't heard of it, so clearly it's not a thing. And the interesting thing is that, just to come back to Jugga the Pow and a lot of those European stick arts, they start to get categorised and catalogued in the early 1900s. If anyone's familiar with what was going on in Ireland in the early 1900s, we did have the Gaelic revival that did put in place steps to try revive traditional Irish arts. But what happened during that is many of those people wanted to focus on the softer arts, so poetry, writing, the language especially, and amazing work was done. But it wanted to create a particular image of Ireland, of the land of saints and scholars. That was the thing that we wanted to portray to the world. We didn't want to have this thing, tarnishing us as such. And you got to remember, at this point, if you're talking about the year 1900, Irish stick fighting, your parents could have been doing that. So it wasn't in the actual faction fights. Maybe 50 odd years before, it was still a big thing in the country, so it wasn't very far removed from people. So during the 1900s, you don't see the efforts to catalogue it, because violence was a very looked down upon thing in the country. And then obviously with all the events that go on in the 1900s between the partition and the War of Independence and the Civil War and everything else in between, we have a multitude of reasons why violence was something that wasn't focused on in the country and really was negatively viewed. So it's just kind of a long rant and a roundabout way of saying, yes, the Irish definitely did practice Irish stick fighting as a martial art, just not in the way that we today view a martial art. And I think that's the big hurdle people have to get over. And even for myself and how I teach it, I don't teach it in the traditional martial arts style of way. I teach it more akin to boxing. I am a coach, but I train with everyone else, and we learn the techniques and we refine them and we try to get better at them, and then we spar and try to improve them from there. That's a very different approach to what people are used to with martial arts, and that's really, from what we can see in the written records and everything else in between, that's what happened with Irish stick fighting. That's how people practice it, and that's how it was done, as is the same case for many, many arts all across Europe and all across the world. We're not going to have those same records and those same traditions that we have in other arts, because these aren't the same as other arts. These are our own arts. These are unique to this country, and they're unique in how they were practiced and how they were done. But not incredibly unique. They were still very similar to what was being done in Europe at the time. And I think that context, if you look at those arts in that way, it makes a lot more sense, and we start to really understand how and why Irish stick fighting was done the way it was. So I do hope that video was in some way useful to you guys, and I would really love to hear your thoughts on it, because I know this topic is something, like I said, that I've ranted about many, many times. And there's a lot to kind of discuss within this video, and it's a big topic in itself. And if you'd like me to talk about things like the Celtic Revival and everything else, let me know. I'm happy to do videos on those and discuss them. And I'm going to try to get more videos on Irish stick fighting itself over this year, and test some things out for you guys and kind of showcase some things for you. So obviously, if there's anything you guys would like to see, please do let me know. And of course, like I said, it's January. People are interested in trying new things. If you want to come try an Irish stick fighting class in Dublin, and you'll find my details in the description. Don't be afraid to reach out. I'd be more than happy to teach you what I know. So once again, thank you all so much for watching. We've hit that 3,000 mark. That was my goal for last year. Aiming for 5 this year. So if you guys haven't subscribed, please do. I really can't thank you all enough for all of your help and support. It means the absolute world to me. Thank you once again, so very much, and slán.